So I'm going to make this a bit interactive today. So I'm going to ask you a question, and then I ask that if it applies to you, you raise your hand and you keep your hand up until the very end. Got that? Good. How many of you have ever felt alone? How many of you have ever felt rejected? How many of you have ever felt small? How many of you have ever felt fear? Now, I want you to look around the room and pay attention to all the hands that are held up high. What you're experiencing is the human condition in its rawest form. And in the society that we live in, we rarely have the opportunity to see one another for who we truly are because our vision is obscured by race, gender, class, and any other characteristic that keeps us separated. I definitely am one to understand rejection all too well. As an activist, I often experience rejection on my quest for justice. In fact, my activism in and of itself is a response to the societal rejection of my humanity. But I think the most painful moments of rejection that I experience are when I have to smash my ego, get really vulnerable, and reach out to others for help. And there have been moments when I reached out to create this sense of camaraderie and compassion, only to be met with callous comparison and proximity to someone else's experiences. For example, when I confided in cis hetero women about the ways in which I was harassed and hypersexualized by men, I often got remarks like, "You wanted to be a woman, this is it. Welcome to womanhood." As if I had a choice of being anything other. I've been abstinent from drugs and alcohol for 6.5 years, and even in and even in sobriety circles, when I vent about the challenges associated with addiction, I get cheeky replies like, "Welcome to recovery," as if I've been hanging out for 6.5 years for the free coffee and donuts. But I'm not alone in that. Many of you have had others welcome you to married life, motherhood, being an adult, an American, fatherhood, manhood, college life, politics, and the list goes on ad infinitum. We are all connected in our truth around wanting to be heard, wanting to be felt, wanting to be acknowledged. And if we're being truthful with ourselves, at some point in our lives, we've also been card-carrying members of the Welcome Committee. While our welcoming remarks are often an attempt to relate to our family members, partner, friends, and colleagues, the impact is often a dismissal of feelings and an invalidation of experiences. When we run people off the road in our welcome wagon, what we're really saying is, get over it. You think you're the only one who knows what it's like to suffer, experience pain? You're not. I know what that's like. And there was absolutely no one there to console me, so why should I console you? This subconscious messaging springs forth from the depths of apathy, and it impedes our capacity to bridge gaps, initiate constructive conversations, sync our similarities, and build alliances. There were moments in which I often talk about the growing threat of violence toward Black trans women whose life expectancy is between the ages of 30 and 35 years old. And I've had my pleas for support shut down by those not taking into consideration that every single day I have to navigate trans misogynoir, which exists at the intersection of transphobia, misogyny, and anti-Blackness. Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw introduced the theory of intersectionality in 1989, explaining that identity markers don't exist independently of one another, but that each informs the other. Simply put, intersectionality describes multiple threats of discrimination when an individual's identities overlap with multiple minority groups. That was really hard for me to communicate to a lot of my friends who are would-be allies in the field. Because while we all have similarities as we experienced in the exercise in the beginning, we also have differences. And in a society fraught with trauma and so deeply fragmented, how do we align ourselves with one another in a way that heals old wounds and makes us stronger as a society? Sometimes we have to take a moment to just pause and examine ways of being effective allies to one another. So, in order to establish effective allyship, first, pinpoint your intentions. What's the real reason you consider yourself an ally? It's important to know this because when you're dragged out of your comfort zone while trying to understand someone from a different walk of life, your intentions will be your motivation to stay the course. There are often times that we've really convinced ourselves deep down inside that we have the best intentions at heart. I've had people invite me as a Black trans woman into spaces to talk about my experiences, only to have me be a puppet to their own messaging so that they could go home and feel better about themselves and not feel the call to action to be better allies. Absolutely not. I've had people in certain spaces who are what I refer to as being diet woke. All the instant psychological gratification of moral correctness without the aftertaste of commitment and zero guilt. And so when we look at our intentions, it holds us accountable not only to the space, not only to others, but it also helps us reach our end goal. The next thing is to acknowledge that disproportionate realities exist. Acknowledgement without action is aided abetment. If we aren't actively working to dismantle all systems of oppression simultaneously, we're passively sustaining them. Many people have a difficult time with that one, myself included, because it means that we have to put ourselves aside and acknowledge different experiences, and it's in our nature to subscribe to this single slice ideology that if you get yours, then I can't possibly get mine. And we start lining up our forms of oppression and our experiences in numerical order, and we practice turns front of the line, back of the line. But what if I told you that we can all be allies on our own individual quest toward liberation? In fact, our support of one another is contingent upon acknowledging other people's experiences. We are of a collective palate, and none of us will taste liberation until we all do. So the other... Next, use judgment as a tool, not a weapon. Being judgmental and exercising judgment aren't necessarily synonymous with one another. Proactive judgment helps us make important life decisions. It helps us to protect ourselves from dangerous situations. And it also helps us unlock creativity and innovation. However, there are moments in which it is our civil duty and social responsibility to speak up and judge situations that are harmful to others. And I had a very uncomfortable introduction to this recently. I do a lot of traveling, I speak at different events, and there was a time where I was exhausted, I was tired, I was traveling city to city to city to city, and I was on flights, and I was on 2 hours of sleep, and so I showed up to an event because I just wanted to just get it out the way. And I was exhausted, and I was just bothered, and I was only thinking about my own experience. And so I made sure that everybody in that room knew that I was not feeling it. I made sure that everybody knew I can do better, but I just choose not to because I have a special exception, because we all come with our special exceptions. And I went home, I was irritated, I was exhausted, I was just upset with people, with myself. I just felt over it. And I got a call from one of the organizers. And so I was like, good, she's come to her senses. She's going to apologize for the uncomfortable situation that I experienced. And instead, she said, I just want you to know that how you behaved today made people feel so small. It made them feel so invisible. It made them feel so invalidated. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, who is she talking to? She's not talking to me. And in the back of my mind, like, I'm thinking, like, I don't need a white woman because that's what my default is. As an activist, I automatically go into fight or flight. So I don't feel connected with you right now because I don't feel embraced by you. So my automatic reaction is to separate us. And I'll do that by any means necessary. Whether it's based on the fact that you're cisgender and I'm not, whether it's based on the fact that you're white and I'm not, whether it's based on the fact that you come from money and I don't. Because that's how I've always preserved myself. And it was really uncomfortable to look at because what made me, the real feelings underneath all of that, it was feelings of shame. It hurt me so bad to know that I made other people feel the way that I have been made to feel my entire life. And it interrupted this romance in my mind of what perfect humanity looked like, because obviously it's me. And so what I recognize is although I've never given birth to a child, and I can't say what that feels like, for me, the most uncomfortable, excruciating pain in my life has been giving birth to truth. And when that truth was brought to me and sat, and it was in my arms, I experienced this sort of intellectual postpartum. I didn't want it. I couldn't connect with it. I couldn't sit with it. I wasn't going to feed it. And it was in that moment that I had experienced true rebirth as a person. The pain of it, the stretching, spreading of my consciousness, it was the most uncomfortable thing in my entire life. But I was willing to do that because I was willing to grow. Next, sharpen your listening skills. I didn't just shut her down. I actually listened to what she had to say. Many of us often we hold conversations with one another because we're playing this death match of conversational ping pong with one another. We're so anxious to get our point across and serve up our opinions that we're not actually listening to what the other person is trying to say. When we talk over people, or we ignore them, or we shut them down, what we're really saying is, I'm more important than you are. What I have to say is more interesting, relevant, or accurate. I don't really care what you think. I don't have time for your opinion, or this isn't a conversation, it's a contest, and I'm going to win. And so one of my greatest lessons in learning about how to listen was my best friend, Matt. We are complete polar opposites. He's white, I'm black, he's cisgender, I'm transgender, I'm spiritual, he's atheist. But when my grandmother was on her deathbed and I was in need, he dropped everything, flew back to Kentucky with me, and loved on her until she took her last breath and closed her eyes forever. That was one of the most excruciating experiences in my life because in that moment, I could not stand to be by myself, left to face the reality of such a soul-crushing loss. He could have easily lectured me and gave me a pep talk on how better it was going to be, but in that moment, he chose to exercise silence as a form of solidarity. And I felt held and appreciated, and I understood that in that moment, that's the power of listening and understanding and empathy that we all need to have. And I took that with me, and I exercise that in everyday life now. Lastly, we have to examine our attitude. It's all about our outlook. It's all about what we take into it. It's all about the messages that we're sending to one another. And at the end of it all, I'm reminded of a quote by Audre Lorde in which she says, I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. And it's a constant reminder that although our differences are great, enfranchisement can be better. And if we are all willing to bridge the divide, come together and advocate for all, we have the potential to breed true allyship. Our lives, although very different, are but pieces of a giant jigsaw puzzle, and the only way we will ever see the bigger picture is when we come together. Thank you.